One of the main traits of a culture is its identity. Here in Egypt, our heritage goes back a long way, thousands and thousands of years of civilization. This is why one stops to think, what is our identity? Is it pharaonic, Arab, African, or a mixture of all? Definitely, each of those has made its mark on the country. Yet the pharaonic has had a huge effect and continues to do so. Suffice it to see the great events that we have witnessed in the past months. This era has made great contributions in the world's history, from scientific discoveries and innovations, whether in the world of physics, astronomy, agriculture, medicine, geography, you name it. There has been a major landmark. The contribution in the continent has also been magnanimous, and this is why there must be a continuation. This era has been pivotal in the linkage of the continent and should continue through a consolidation of the heritage and a strengthening of the national identity through integrated teachings of this heritage in our educational system, our culture, and our relations with the continent and the world. Good evening. You're watching The Business Insider here on Nile TV International, and I'm Ayman Salah. Our weekly program tackles events affecting economies and business, and we aim to bring you the inside story. Welcome back. Let's start with the first news item for this week. The Central Bank of Egypt is offering support for financially distressed small and medium enterprises, or SMEs. This is the latest in a string of CBE measures to increase SME support and is part of its financial inclusion strategy launched in 2019. This has painted SME support as one of its key pillars. The bank also put in place earlier this year requirements for banks to increase micro, small and medium enterprises' share of their loan portfolios. Financially distressed SMEs at risk of default will be given more time and more avenues to settle their debts under a raft of new decisions announced this week by the CBE, such as restructuring of credit facilities based on their available funds and their ability to pay. Second news item is that Egypt's economy is expected to grow by 6 to 7% in the second quarter of this fiscal year. According to the Minister of Planning, Hala El-Said, the forecast for the second quarter is slightly lower than the 9.8% growth recorded in the first quarter. However, she stressed that the overall GDP growth rate for the year is somewhere between 5.5% and 5.7%. GDP has continued to rebound to reach 7.2% in the second and third quarter of previous year, and that the fastest rate of growth seen in 2 decades. We'll be back. Welcome back to the Business Insider. So tonight I have the pleasure to be joined by Dr. Fattah Badr Mohamed. He's professor of genetics and plant biodiversity, Helwan University. A pleasure having you on the show tonight. Of course, I understand that food security is one of your specializations, and we recently had the Food Expo that just closed its doors a day or two ago. We're going to cover that, the Food Expo, but we're also going to touch on food security. Let's watch this report and then resume our discussion. We'll be back.
3 organizations have come up with a report covering a regional overview of food security and nutrition, statistics and trends in Africa. Those are the Food and Agricultural Organization of the United Nations, the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa, and the African Union. The report concludes that Africa is not on track to meet the Sustainable Development Goals, and targets to end hunger and ensure access by all people to safe, nutritious and sufficient food all year round, and to end all forms of malnutrition. Recent estimates show that over 281 million people on the continent, over one-fifth of the population, faced hunger in 2020. That's 46.3 million more in 2019. The food security situation is determined by a number of key, often overlapping drivers, including conflict, climate variability and extremes, economic slowdowns and downturns, and the unaffordability of healthy diets. The many challenges to improving food security and nutrition on the continent are considerable, and it will take close collaboration across countries and at the international level to address them effectively. Together with interventions in health, water and education, the agri-food system plays an important role in achieving SDG 2. However, this involves many stakeholders in transition to more efficient, inclusive, resilient and sustainable agri-food systems for better production, better nutrition, a better environment and for better lives for all, as well as ensuring that no one is behind. A common vision, strong political leadership and effective cross-sectorial collaboration, which includes the private sector, are essential to agree on trade-offs and to identify and implement sustainable solutions that transform agri-food systems so they can deliver healthy, affordable diets.
Welcome back. So Food Expo and Africa's food security is our topic tonight. Excuse me. I'm joined by Dr. Fattah Badr Mohamed, Professor of Genetics and Plant Biodiversity, Helwan University. Once again, a pleasure having you on the show.
It's a pleasure having me. Thank you.
Let's start with the conference's significance and the participating countries.
Yes, it's very important to it's very important to actually to organize this expo, to strengthen our relation with African countries and to organize other countries also to participate. I have visited the expo, right, and I have seen not only the African countries but other countries too. So this is a very important step towards strengthening our agricultural and our food security with the African countries.
Is it only for African countries, the expo?
No, other countries were there. Argentina, for example, and the other countries were participating in the conference. Of course, it's important to have the African country. We need more relations with African countries. We need more cooperation with African countries, not
right,
only because in agriculture, but also in other fields. But agriculture in particular is very important because our water comes from Africa. So we need to cooperate with African countries.
Right.
Particular.
Food security is, I believe, was a main topic in the expo, and it is a cornerstone for any development and for any independence, for that matter.
Yes, of course.
Why?
First, food security is important. Here, why food security is an issue? Food security is an issue for three reasons, actually. For causes. Why that is important? For example, for poverty, climate change, many factors affect food security. So we need to examine what causes affect food security. The other part is actually why food security can be symptoms of food security. If we don't have food security, we have deterioration of health, we have deterioration of nutrition, we have hunger, we have loss of life, we have civil unrest, we can even have economic instability, we can even have social instability and political instability. So food security is actually the basis for stability of the countries, stability for the societies. So we need to secure food security. And to actually secure food security, we need to have four...
We'll go into the four pillars.
Pillars.
One of the sayings that really resounded in my ear was a saying by a renowned scientist. I remember when we had a meeting, and he said in Arabic, "Man la yamluk utu la yamluk qararu," those who do not have their food, self-sufficient in food, cannot have control over their decisions and independence.
Yes, of course. It's true.
It's true.
It's true.
And you see that in the continent as a major phenomenon?
Unfortunately, most African countries live in imports.
Live on imports?
Live on imports, including Egypt. We import about 50–60% of our wheat, 90% of our oils, maize. So the major food for our daily life is actually important. And we have to work hard on this to actually secure more food production in Egypt, and actually also to cooperate with African countries to produce food in Africa as well. So to increase the cooperation of Africa, there are many ways I can think of.
And to achieve the security issue that you have mentioned a moment ago, there must be strong coordination in order to be able to cover the items that you mentioned in the security issue itself. Right. So you were saying there are four major pillars when we talk about food security. You have food stability, you have food availability, you have access to supply, and effective utilization. Right. So let's start with the food stability.
Food stability is based actually on the available resources. If you have some resources, you have to improve these resources. If you have, in agriculture, we have what you call genetic resources. So you have to work harder on genetic resources to develop more productive varieties and more productive crops. And this is the resources. And the other one, increase the availability of food, is based actually in the production. You need to improve the production, ways of production, mechanization, to develop more crops, that is, to use more modern approaches in agriculture, to actually minimize use of water, to minimize use of fertilizers, but at the same time, you need to have more production from your crops. You also need to improve food marketing.
Supply chain.
Supply chain. Supply chain is very important. You also have to minimize the loss of crops. For example, in medicinal plants, we export medicinal plants in Egypt, but about 20–30% is lost because the primitive way used for harvesting, how to storage crops, you lose some value of these crops because of some old-fashioned ways of handling the crop after harvest. So you need to minimize the after-harvest loss. These are all to increase the availability for food security. The third one is to access, and this, of course, based on increased income. To add more added value to the crops, so you increase the income from your production. You can also use manufacturing. Instead of exporting or using raw material, you can actually do agriculture. You can export finished products like jams, like other. Instead of exporting medicinal plants, you can actually extract the pharmaceutical compounds from these plants, and then you use these pharmaceutical compounds and you sell it for higher price instead of exporting the plant itself.
Here you're talking about creating added value.
Added values, yes. So if you
which will give you higher returns.
Of course, about 10 times.
10 times.
10 times.
Other than exporting
yes,
the raw
of course.
materials.
You can also use it for manufacturing medicine. Medicinal compounds can be used to produce.
That's one component. You have other other
examples,
resources
for example,
in agricultural
instead
produce.
of exporting
Cocoa,
fruits,
for example.
yes, instead of producing fruits, you can export juice. So if you export juice, you add value to the fruit itself. So, and also you encourage industries that provide employment for people who actually work in industries.
In the Food Africa exhibition and conference, there was a focus on growth opportunities.
Yes, yes.
How?
Growth opportunities is to increase, for example, nutrition value of the crops itself. You can increase the food consumption. You can use more effective food utilization. So this added value to the crop itself, and increase the growth means growth rate of you can if for example
growth of production, or growth of
so you can actually increase the contribution of the agriculture sector to the Egyptian economy or in other economy in other African countries too. Right. So if you actually increase the export of agricultural products, you increase the addition of economic addition from agricultural sector.
Let me go back to the 4 pillars, the availability, the stability, the access to supply and effective utilization. When you were talking about availability, you said there was a need to focus more on the means of producing. And here it comes to mind the technological advances and reliance on technology in this aspect.
Yes. Technology, of course, is technology is a very general term. In agricultural, there is recent technologies for mechanization of agriculture. You actually use less water for growing crops. So we have a problem with water supply, and we have to work on this hard. To produce crops that use less water, and with the limited water we have from the Nile and the few water, underground water, we have to increase our agricultural production. So if we actually use more efficient ways to water plants, and with less water we can increase the production itself.
So you have water, you have the fertilizers. The way you are producing the crops. And here when you talk about Africa, you have countries that are that don't have water resources. You have those that have very large amounts of water. How can those countries cooperate? It comes to mind, for example, that to grow certain crops that are water extensive, you can rely on a country that has plentiful or plenty water resources. And for those countries, for the crops that do not rely on water, you can have it being produced in another country that doesn't have. How can this coordination be done between African countries?
I would think if we need longer-term coordination, there is plenty of land that can be cultivated in Africa. In Ethiopia, for example, and in South Sudan and in Sudan itself. So if we can make some agreements to grow our crops in these countries, and then we will import, instead of importing crops of these countries, they have lands they cannot cultivate, they have water, so we can actually rent land there and cultivate crops in these countries.
Or for the crops that they produce, you can manufacture products take the crops and manufacture
crops,
them,
yeah.
if you will,
even
to create added value.
We can actually send the Egyptian farmers there. The Egyptian farmer is very clever, and he probably can cultivate land better than the others because they don't have the experience we have. So we can actually cultivate crops there and pay them the rent or share the production with them. Actually, some countries like China actually hire lands from some African countries, and they of course, China doesn't have a water problem.
There was an old project
Yeah.
between Egypt, Libya, and Sudan.
Yes, yes.
To,
I remember this, yeah.
to grow wheat in Sudan, and Libya would finance it,
Yes,
and Egypt
yes,
would
yes.
send the technical
farmers.
expertise
Yes, yes,
and the
yes.
farmers and so on.
Yeah.
And this didn't work out for political reasons at the time. But can this model be replicated?
Yeah, probably it was. We don't need too much politics in the cooperation in agriculture system.
Right.
Make it business. So we
So
do like
here
business,
you have to integrate the private sector.
Yes,
Would you
the
agree?
private sector has very, like we do like in electricity, for example. We build dams in Tanzania, we build dams in other African countries. Why not cultivate lands there and share the agricultural production with them? They have lands, they have water, and we have experience, we have clever farmers, and we can share. There's no problem. And for the longer term, that can work if it's business.
Here, when you're talking about agriculture, are you only talking about plants, or does that include livestock as well?
Livestock as well. Agriculture means plants, crops, but also animal production is part of agriculture. Grazing animals, you know, in some African countries, grazing, you can have thousands of cows and sheep. They just graze free because the rainfall is enough for grazing in savanna region, for example. So we can actually not only crops but also livestock.
All right, so it seems from what you're saying is that the accumulated resources in Africa are sufficient to reach self-reliance.
Yes.
When we're talking about agricultural produce, and here, as you said, you're talking livestock and crops. How can continental cooperation be achieved?
Probably we start with countries we have some cooperation, we have no problems. So we can, for example, we import cows from Somalia, for example, from Kenya, from other African countries. And we bring them to them in Egypt and feed them for a month or two so they have the taste, the Egyptian taste, the baladi taste we have. So if we make agreement to actually raise these animals there and then bring them to Egypt, if we have agreement to cultivate some wheat and some other crops there and bring them to Egypt, these, in my view, it's not politics, it is business, it is cooperation. If they have a good share and we have a good share, it can last for longer than we think. I mentioned that some other countries in the African Horn, in Ethiopia, in Kenya, in Somalia, in Tanzania, and Djibouti, and even in some countries from Middle Africa as well. Middle Africa have a lot of water.
Central Africa.
Central Africa. Of course, they have resources, but unfortunately they cannot utilize these resources. We can help them. We can provide our experience. We have good experience with Africa. We have the International Center for Agriculture in the Ministry of Agriculture. We provide some training. We for them, and we can build on this for the long-term cooperation.
What needs to be done in order to have such long-term cooperation? Are we talking about political will?
Political will.
Are we talking about engagement of the private sector? Are we talking about an enhancing of the business environment? Are we talking about...
You just named it. You just named all. Political will. I think now we have a political will. We actually, not only agriculture, we actually open to African countries. Now we, in the universities, we offer African students grants to study in our universities. Helwan University, for example, has offered 60 grants this year. And in Kafr Sheikh yesterday, we've seen some African countries in the meeting with the president at Kafr Sheikh University. Al-Azhar University, of course, provide thousands of grants to African and Muslim countries. So when you have these students in your universities, and when they go back, they will be ambassadors for you in their countries. Political will, I think we have political will. Private sector, we have now some private sectors who are willing to go to Africa and invest there.
But those have their own set of challenges. For example, the lack of harmony within the banking sector in order to transfer money and
of course,
open
we have
LCs
to develop our systems. We have to develop new approaches, new systems, new banking systems that will facilitate the cooperation. So just talk about cooperation and don't take actions to make this cooperation possible.
You also have another factor, which is the logistics factor. In order to move the produce from one country to another, and the cost of transportation with the current infrastructure in some African countries, that will be very high.
Yeah, we need to work on this too. We think of a train from Egypt to South Africa, to Cape Town. If we think of a train to Cape Town, we can actually reach more closer countries to us. Nothing is impossible to work hard, but to take it serious and to study the current situation and the plan for sustainability. Like we started with sustainability, food security and sustainability of food security. And of course, we know food in Africa is not secure. We know most African countries live on imports. So it's in our interest to improve our security, food security. It is their interest to improve their security. Probably they are willing to cooperate with us. We have to instead of importing from Europe or from other we import from the United States, from Argentina, from Australia. And these countries are far away compared to
Brazil.
Africa and Brazil, of course. So African countries, they have resources, good resources. They need experience, they need expertise. Probably we have this expertise.
So what was the outcome of the Food Expo?
The Food Expo is, of course, a lot of agreements have been made, of course.
Can you give us a brief?
I have seen some businessmen working in the food industry. And they were there and they were contacting some others as well. I have seen some non-African countries coming to, make agreement with African countries, not only with Egypt but also with African countries. I have seen even some Gulf states in the Expo. So the Expo was good because it brought together exporter and importers. I hope we will be exporters more than importers.
So there was more of a B2B.
Yes, it was business. It was, of course, business. It was actually meant to be business, but in the longer term, we need not only Expo, but we need more solid, more stable, more sustainable, more longer-term cooperation to secure food security and to actually work on resources, on production, on income, and on...
Are we on the way?
I think the Ministry of Agriculture has to work with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and with the Ministry of Trade and Industry, and of course with the Egyptian embassies, and to arrange this. We talk as experts. We provide some thoughts. We provide some probably
Marketing
views.
is up to those
who have the decisions.
Dr. Fattah Badr Mohamed, Professor of Genetics and Plant Biodiversity, Helwan University. A pleasure having you on the show.
Thank you very much for having
tonight.
me.
Thank you very much for coming. Thank you for joining me. It was a pleasure being with Dr. Fattah and tackling the African Expo, the Food Expo. Hope to see you soon. I'm Ayman Salah. Good night.
Okay. Mashallah.